All right, so Jirair, great to see you. We've we've been in touch. We've known each other for a few years, and so you're running for Congress in California's 30th district. Can you just tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're running, and also any connection you have to the Iranian American community?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Jamal. Thanks for this time together. I am running for Congress, as you said, in the 30th Congressional District. This is in California, the state with the most number of Iranian Americans in the country, and specifically in LA, where we know there's a huge Iranian community. I'm born and raised in Los Angeles. This is my hometown seat. Most folks may know Adam Schiff. This is Adam Schiff's seat, and he's served for half the time I've been alive, actually, and for me, it was an opportunity to really return to my hometown seat and run to serve the community that I've been a part of, a community that's been welcoming to my own immigrant family, and a community that deserves a lot of attention and representation in Congress. Those are the reasons why I'm running. It includes parts of the San Fernando Valley, including Burbank, Glendale, Hollywood, West Hollywood, and including Sunline and Tahunga as well. So it has a huge Iranian population and the most number of Armenian Americans too. Close to about 15% of the district are Armenian Americans. So I'm constantly talking about my immigrant family story, the connectivity between the diverse communities that are part of the district, and also just kind of where I went to school. I went to Holy Martyrs Encino. It was an Armenian school, so a lot of my friends and community came from Taft, which is just kind of down the street, really. And so, and then went to UCLA too, which has a huge Iranian population. And so there's a lot of familiarity between just our own cultures in general. So it feels like home to engage with all these different communities.
The reason I thought it would be really important to talk to you is that you are being called the peace candidate in this crowded field for this open seat. And so, especially with all that's going on, I think that is a really important distinction. So I wanted to ask you sort of, what is the distinction there? I know kind of first and foremost, you were the first and I think only candidate who has called for a ceasefire in the war.
There's another one now, but definitely, yes, but first one. Yeah.
Okay. So can you tell us how you came to that decision?
Yeah, it's interesting, Jamal, reflecting on the past 3 months, more than 3 months now. It's crazy to think that I had to be labeled as a peace candidate. What kind of world do we live in that somebody has to be called a peace candidate? Shouldn't we all be peace candidates? But I guess not, right? I ended up really my ceasefire call was on October 17. We had to go back and look at it because one reporter said it was one of the earliest in the country, actually. It's not something that I tout, proudly, because when the horrific attacks happened, we were all devastated by the loss of life. We were devastated by, how the act of terror can cause so much havoc to communities, of course, the hostages, including, American hostages. So, I wanted, us to defeat Hamas and have regional security, but it was very clear from the first few days in terms of the rhetoric from the Netanyahu administration and what was happening 10 days after the attack, that this was going to quickly spiral out of control, that the loss of life and the humanitarian impact on Palestinians living in Gaza, who were already subjected to, a blockade, that this was just going to be catastrophic, right? And so I called for a ceasefire. It was the moral thing to do. It was also, in my opinion, what is in the interest of U.S. foreign policy as well. The Saudis have said they're not going to normalize relations with Israel without, a two-state solution. The Netanyahu administration has laughed at the prospects of peace and a two-state solution, and that's very dangerous, right? And it's also something that I made parallels to my own community. Armenians, it's still a difficult topic to talk about. just a month before the October 7 attack, Azerbaijan attacked Nagorno-Karabakh, Artsakh, where 120,000 Armenians have called home for thousands of years. That population was under a blockade. Look at the parallels, for 8 months by Azerbaijan. No food, no electricity, no internet, no humanitarian access. After an 8-month blockade, and I had the opportunity to visit during month 7 of that, and I saw the humanitarian convoys that were parked at that border. I didn't realize that we're going to get attacked a month later, but Azerbaijan attacked overnight and drove 120,000 Armenians out of that piece of land, and they claimed it, and those Armenians had to fled to Armenia. So 7 days they were on the road, driving, walking to Armenia, which is just crazy to think about. And so as Armenians, we know what it's like to lose your homeland. We know what it's like to have your identity threatened, have a history of genocide. And so for me, the parallels were so obvious. And you know, the rest is kind of history, as I said. We are also very scared about the escalation of war in the region. And unfortunately, every one of those nightmare scenarios have come true, you know, and we're now over 4 months into this with no end in sight, no real strategy by the Israeli government to end this war, no end in sight on how they're going to defeat and erase Hamas, which is their stated goals. And, you know, I know the Biden administration is trying to bring a coalition together to demand action, but we need more than words. We need strong action. We need conditions on aid. I've called for no more aid for this war already, you know, and I'm not afraid to stand alone when it's the right thing to do. And I'm the only candidate that has laid out that kind of position. And it's something that it has become a very personal issue for me as well.
Mm. Well, you mentioned the slide into a potential regional war, and I think that all of us are seeing the horrors and destruction that have already occurred, and now looking at this possibility, this risk of a regional war, a direct confrontation between or involving the U.S. and Iran. So, if you were elected to Congress, what would you do to try to pull the U.S. and Iran back from the brink of a war?
Yeah, you know, one thing we've learned in this whole experience is that we need more representatives who lead with peace, right? And you called me the peace candidate, or the Pasadena Star News called me the peace candidate, but it turns out we need a lot of peace candidates, because even within the Democratic Party, because there's a lot that we have to do to bring us back from that brink of war, not only with Iran, but more broadly, right? I think when I was working for Congressman Barbara Lee as her legislative director, is when I first worked with NIAC, saw the critical role that NIAC played in helping to craft and get to the finish line the first Iran nuclear deal under the Obama administration. I was proud to be one of those staffers that were building bridges between the Congressional Black Caucus and the Congressional Progressive Caucus to get more members to understand the value of diplomacy and that agreement that the Obama administration had pursued, right? And so that's the kind of lived experience and legislative experience that I'm bringing. And if I get elected, I would bring that kind of practicality to any NDAA bill that comes to the floor, the defense authorization bill, the defense appropriations bill. We have to use those so-called must-pass legislation to put conditions on funding, to leverage what we can to prevent an escalation of war, and not be afraid to call for more conditions on aid, more conditions on FMF, foreign military financing. And I think the broader issue, Jamal, you and I have talked about this, and I know you guys have worked on this as well. It's how do we reinsert congressional authority over war? There's been a slide of Congress's application responsibility going back to probably 2001. That first authorization of use of military force that President Bush sought from Congress after 9/11. Barbara Lee, my former boss, was the only one in the House and Senate to vote against it. And since then, we've seen basically an abdication of Congress's role in declaring war, in being part of approving military operations, approving military weapons transfers, and you see now what's happening. It's been this constant over reliance on these authorizations to cause to get us more and more involved in these wartime efforts. And Congress needs to step up and reinsert itself. And we need to talk about how we modernize war powers. And those are the kinds of things that I think about, that I'd lead. And the benefit of being in a district like this, Jamal, that has a large Armenian population, that has a large Iranian American population, a large Latino population as well, where it's a very foreign policy oriented constituency that's very sensitive to foreign policy issues. And so they expect a member of Congress to be fighting for homelessness, but also being champions of peace and for foreign policy priorities as well. And I'm the only one in this race that has that kind of experience. And I've got endorsements as well from Foreign Policy for America, Peace Action. Those are the kinds of organizations that I want to be associated with.
Yeah, and I think, I just want to emphasize here, I think it is pretty rare to have somebody who knows the mechanics. I mean, you worked on the Hill, you worked in the State Department. So to have somebody who knows the mechanics of how Washington actually works, how all these processes actually function behind our foreign policy. But to have that experience and to have worked on these issues from that pro-peace side of things, because there are plenty of people who know how things work, who are either, sort of middle of the road or maybe on the wrong side of these issues. But to have worked, especially in an office like Barbara Lee, that has that was often sort of the leading edge of pushing against some of the militarism on the Hill. And so I think that's really important to underscore that experience that you have in that regard and how valuable that potentially could be.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you for that. Absolutely. And we have to, would you agree that we have to have higher expectations for who we elect to Congress, right? You could bring that kind of foreign policy experience and leadership, but also fight domestic issues, and we can walk and chew gum. This is the United States of America. We're the strongest country in the world, and we should have higher expectations of our Congress, of our elected officials, of our administration, and of our judiciary. So at least that's the way we approach it.
Well, yeah, and it's all linked. There is not a firewall between foreign policy and domestic policy, and so I actually wanted to ask you about for Iranian Americans, we lived through the Muslim ban under Donald Trump, and that is now potentially going to be reimposed and expanded depending on what happens in November. Iranian Americans have faced discrimination from banks who are enforcing sanctions, ostensibly or supposedly aimed at the Iranian government, but that often end up impacting ordinary people and impacting Americans. There is this trend where there are these land laws being passed at the state level, and they've even tried to pass them at the federal level to restrict property sales to people of certain heritage or nationalities, including Iranians, all based on foreign threats or perceived foreign threats. So so my question for you, as the child of Armenian immigrants, how does that inform your views of foreign policy and its impact on domestic policy and issues like civil rights for immigrant communities?
Yeah, I mean, such an important question, right? Because my mom was actually born in Lebanon, so I like to also talk about her Lebanese roots and my connectivity to Armenians and also the Lebanese community out here too. There's so many parallels between my communities and the Iranians. We've also been subjected to discrimination by banks. There's a big lawsuit against Citi right now that the Armenian American community is leading. And like you said, Jamal, foreign policy is local, and we're seeing that play out with the Iranian community and also with the Armenian community here as well. A couple things. One, we have to underscore that Trump and his MAGA party, they really pose an existential and real threat to American democracy, but also global order, right? With NATO, you hear what Trump is saying about NATO's our NATO allies who he's saying should be attacked if they're not paying their dues, right? In the middle of a war that NATO is leading now to support Ukraine. So I mean, this is like really dangerous stuff. I know folks are disillusioned and they're upset that it's Trump versus Biden. They're upset that Congress is not doing more on the ceasefire. And but this is an example where in this 30th congressional district, for anyone who's in the LA area, and this is true for a lot of congressional districts, you have a choice between somebody who's going to be pro-peace, pro-ceasefire. We talked about all the issues, and someone who's just going to be, an establishment figure. And the difference is is stark, right? Because you're either going to have someone like me who's going to be a disruptor the way Barbara Lee was, and who's going to be pro-peace oriented, or someone who is just going to be part of the machine. And then how are we ever going to get the kind of change that we want? So if folks are disillusioned, they should be voting. And in California, we have the primary in exactly a week, and folks are sitting on their mail-in ballots that everyone gets here in California. It's a great little way of promoting democracy. Take the ballot, vote for your candidate, and get it delivered today, right? Because you can still make a big difference. But going back to your original question, there's a lot that I think elected officials can do locally and globally. We talk about foreign policy, Jamal, in terms of just advocating for foreign policy positions that are pro-peace, pro-human rights, development that recognize the interconnectivity of these different immigrant communities. But I think locally we should also be championing issues that safeguard the rights of immigrants, ensuring that they have access to legal protections, healthcare, education. In California, I know NIAC's been a big supporter of this, but the MENA Act is a huge deal because Iranian Americans get counted, Armenian Americans get counted under the MENA Act as well, and without data, we don't have power. But if we're counted, that's how we can really show up and exert the kind of influence that our communities deserve, right? And I think community engagement is also really important. I see a lot of hate that's being spewed by different community leaders, including in my own community, and as it relates to LGBTQ issues right now, and it's really dangerous. And I think we have to be building bridges. Those of us who are from immigrant communities have a greater responsibility to share the welcome that we received as immigrants to this country, and build bridges across different communities so that we can share information about our culture, foster inclusion and understanding between our customs and traditions, and that overall education and awareness creates an environment where we're all respected and we're all working together towards a common set of goals of dignity, of respect, recognition, all the things that we all want ultimately. So there's a lot to do locally, globally, and as you said so well, they're also very much connected.
Well, I think that's a compelling case. So you mentioned the elections on next
March
Tuesday.
5, man, 1 week, yeah.
People already have their ballots in the mail. So anything else you want to add, or any final thoughts?
Well, no, I just want to say thanks to the work that you lead and that the NIAC members have done for so many years to foster the environment for members of Congress, for aspiring members of Congress like me to have a community to call home, to fight for these issues. It's really important. NIAC was on the right side of history as it relates to ceasefire as well, and called it so early. And I think that we can't be disillusioned. And I'm running for Congress because I actually believe Congress can work. And but if we don't have more young people who know how Congress works and who go to Congress to make it work better, make bridges with Republicans and independents, how are we going to ever turn this around, right? And so let's not lose hope. Let's elect good people to deliver results, and that's what my campaigns has been is for. And your listeners who are in the LA area, please reach out, hit us up on social media, give us a call, and vote. I'm looking forward to engaging folks in the next 6-7 days that we have left.